Hello and welcome to another of the Inner Adventure, a series where nature, ecology and psychology meet. I am Lutz Otto. I'm a specialist walking and wilderness guide, as well as business consultant. And my co-host, who you've all come to know well, Dr. Ken Jennings, a psychologist in private practice. Today we have a special guest with us, Grant Hine. For all of you that follow the media, you'll come to really see the value of time in nature and the benefits that we have from spending time in nature. I think COVID-19 has really accentuated this, and I so often hear of people saying, geez, we just need to get out and walk in the forest. So I think that sets up today's conversation really nicely in the sense that we really wanted to explore forest bathing, and thus our guest Grant Hine. Grant has spent 30 years in the nature guiding industry, in fact, more than 30. He has a master's degree in psychology. He has some of the highest nature guiding qualifications you can attain. He managed or led the Field Guides Association for 17 years. He's written a number of books. He now runs his own company called Zen Guiding. Perhaps as a starting point, I thought I'd ask Grant the question, what really brought him to writing his latest book, which is called Mindful Nature, and just telling us, A, how he got to writing the book, and B, a little bit about the book. Grant, welcome. Really nice to have you here.
Thanks, Lutz. It's great to be here. And thanks, Ken.
Good. So, yeah, what brought you to writing Mindful Nature? Tell us a little bit about your journey, and then tell us a little bit about the book.
Sure. I've been trying to connect people to nature for a number of years, and there's nothing much written in clear English that explains the whole process that the average person can understand. And the word Zen, in my Zen Guiding, a lot of people have very misconceptions about what the meaning of Zen is. So I try to move slightly away from using the word Zen and rather use mindfulness, mindful nature. And it's basically a combination of my understanding of nature and a deeper understanding now of trees in particular, and my psychology background. I just brought it all together and created or further developed forest bathing programs where I take people out into the forest and basically reconnect them by using our senses. And through that, they discover things about themselves. And unbeknownst to them, although if they read the book now, they will know they are being healed automatically by just being in the forest. Because the trees are doing the therapy. I'm just the guide who's the facilitator. I'm not the therapist. The trees do the therapy. I'm just facilitating the process by opening people's sense gates, basically, to be receptive to what the trees are doing for us. And that's basically how I came to write the book, because I thought there are a lot of books written on forest bathing, mostly American, and I just thought I'd like to write it from my own experience and my own thoughts on it, and how I've explained the scientific side of things, and then I've put in a whole lot of exercises, the process that I take people through to reconnect.
Grant, this idea about forest bathing is interesting to me because I've never done any forest bathing. So, and this idea about bathing, I mean, do you sort of put on a costume and just lie there and almost like taking the energy like we do from the sun? Or can you go into that a little bit more?
Well, I mean, generally it doesn't mean taking your kit off and jumping into the water, although that is a particular exercise that I try to encourage as long as there are pools of water in the forest. Okay. But generally, the bathing aspect is bathing in the atmosphere of the forest. So it's actually got nothing to do with the water. Mm-hmm. And the forest bathing was sort of brought about by the Japanese doing about 30 years of research now on the effect that forests have on us physically and mentally. And the Ministry of Agriculture, or the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry and Fisheries, basically defined it as Shinran Yoko. And if we translate that word, it means bathing in the atmosphere of the forest, or forest bathing. So you can swim if you want to, but generally we're just opening our senses and bathing in the atmosphere of the forest.
I find it amazing that in the US, countries like Sweden, I see Scotland, are all now prescribing nature therapy, and forest bathing has shifted from, I think, was previously thought as being perhaps a little bit esoteric to fairly mainstream. I read a fantastic article last week in Tatler about Tatler, the fashion magazine, about forest bathing. It's just crazy how there's been this real shift in thinking towards spending time in these magnificent spaces.
No, absolutely. I think a lot of people, they've been aware of this for a long time, but a lot of people are very skeptical until there's some science to prove it. And the Japanese have been doing research since the late 1980s, and they've now proved it from a scientific point of view that it is hugely beneficial to just be in a forest. They recommend about 5 hours a month will allow you to maintain the levels of chemicals that we take in from the trees, called phytoncides. So the fact that it's now been scientifically proven, a lot of people are now, I think, jumping on the bandwagon and trying to promote this kind of thing. But we've known it all along. We didn't need science to prove it, but obviously a lot of people in our modern day age seem to want a sort of scientific proof for something to be real.
Grant, this idea about that we've known it all along, I mean, that resonates with me. Every time, so I live on the edge of the Black Forest, and every time I do some walks in the Black Forest, in the forest with just these trees, I always come away feeling more, call it balanced, feeling more at peace, feeling more relaxed, feeling more energized and connected within myself. So I think we do know this. You know, we don't need science to prove this. I think if we just go back to our own feeling of, let's say, before entering into the forest, or being sort of like enveloped with these trees. And then when you walk away from it after spending an hour or 2 hours in that context. So that's the one thing that I certainly have noticed with myself. The second thing is, I think the beauty about trees is they don't want anything from us. You know, they're not demanding anything from us. They're not telling us what to do, how to do it. They're just there. And that sort of being in that place where you just have to be in the forest, I think is psychologically, emotionally, physically very regenerative in terms of our energies.
You know, the species, our evolutionary process, we've spent 99.9% of our time as a species out in nature. It's only the last minute percentage that we've actually been in the situation we are in now. So we almost have this affiliation to want to be in nature. Our brain, I think, is geared towards us living in nature. And now living in this modern day world, we're forced to, in a way, keep up. And this keeping up creates stress. And we're constantly living with stress. Whereas naturally our brain is not used to that kind of stress. Out in the bush, we would have short-lived stress, like, you know, zebras don't get ulcers because they're not constantly under a stressful situation. They get chased by lions, they're highly stressed, the lions move off, then they totally relaxed again. They don't hold it there like we do. We seem to hold the stress the whole time, which obviously creates all sorts of chemical reactions in our bodies, increased cortisol all the time, and so we're just more and more stressed. So this time spent out in nature, automatically we're going back to what our physical body has been used to for the last 99% of our time on this planet. And I think E.O. Wilson, the evolutionary biologist, basically introduced the whole idea of biophilia, where we have this affinity towards being attracted to other living beings, or other living species, be they trees, pets, wild animals. And he didn't come up with the term initially. It was Erich Fromm who came up with that term. But E.O. Wilson introduced it into the biological sciences. And there's almost, it's almost like we need to affiliate with nature in order to maintain our sanity in a way. And we now know from a scientific point of view what the trees are actually doing for us. Whereas before we just felt good. Everybody feels good if they walk through a forest or walk along the beach even. Walking along the beach with the crashing waves, that water movement and waterfalls create negative ions, which are good for us, which cancel out the positive ions, which we get from the technology we use all day, cell phones and TVs and computers. And just walking along the beach, or if somebody feels bad, they go and have a shower. Just that crashing water in the shower, you always feel good after a shower. And people don't understand this. Now, from a scientific point of view, now we know. But as you say, we don't need to know from a scientific point of view that things are good for us. But the average person out there seems to only believe things when they've been scientifically proven. So, yeah, I think spending time out in the forest, out in the savannah, those trees give off these chemicals called phytoncides or terpenes. We take those in, we breathe them in, and they have huge amounts of effects on us. They change our blood pressure, our blood sugar, they lift depression, they're mood boosting, we have more energy, we sleep better. They produce anti-cancer cells, our natural killer cells. So our whole immune system is boosted just by spending time in a forest.
I find it interesting, that point, Grant, that there's studies now, and we're coming back to the science, having just spoken about the science in a different context. But some of these effects can be for as long as 30 days after spending time in a forest. I think that's just amazing. And the impact on natural killer cells or the impact of improvements with natural killer cells, I think, is groundbreaking science on two levels. Number one, sure, it gives us the benefit of fighting these cancer cells. But number two, I think the more time that people spend in nature, another passion of mine really gets activated, in the sense that the more time they spend in nature, the more they're likely to conserve nature. So there's the flip side of this. We're getting a benefit, but through us spending time in nature, we know that if systems are utilized and protected, they're more likely to stay. We've lost in Africa in the last 20 years, I think it's 15% of wilderness, and that's insane. So the more we can get people out there, we get the conservation benefit too.
I think obviously the more people understand the benefits of nature, the more they're going to want to conserve it. So it's a double-edged sword in a way, because we'll look after nature because we know it's looking after us. And I mean, it's in the case of trees producing what they do. I mean, they produce oxygen for us, but that's not their role, because oxygen is just a byproduct of photosynthesis. We just benefit from it. And anybody says, no, we don't depend on nature, I always just say, well, how long can you hold your breath for? Because that's where we're getting our oxygen from, So I think the more and more people come to understand our connection to nature and our dependence upon it, the more we will want to protect it. But I don't know how long that's going to take to convince the rest of the 7 billion people on this planet to actually believe it.
I firmly believe that exposure is a good thing. The more we get people out there, and in wild contexts. Ken and I have spoken a lot about wilderness. I think it's one thing being in a fancy establishment and experiencing wilderness. There's a completely different feeling, experience, exposure, connection that happens when we're in a truly wild place. Not necessarily wilderness, just perhaps a huge tract of forest or a large tract of savanna. I think the more we can get folk out there, the more likely they are to protect it. But we digress. I mean, we're talking about forest bathing. Ken, what are you thinking?
I want to share a little experiment that I did, and it's linking to this connection that we're talking about. Now, not everybody has got access to forests and waterfalls and so on. So I was consulting with a client who was struggling with emotional tension and aggression and holding on to resentments and so And what I did, I took 5 photographs, different photographs of waterfalls, with the trees and the waterfalls. And part of the ritual, or part of the suggestion of an intervention, I asked this client to focus on these photographs every day for about 5-10 minutes. Just to go through, connect with the photograph, this beautiful waterfall, trees and so on. And after a couple of weeks, by going through this process, he actually spoke more about the fact that he was able to let go. That the connection that he had had with the photographs, seeing the water flow, seeing the water falling, letting go, that he felt so much better, and the heightened anger that he kept on feeling in certain situations had actually diminished. So that was an interesting little experiment, just with myself as a therapist and my client, just getting him to focus and visualize on these 5 photographs of the waterfalls. And I found that was very interesting for me. I don't know what Grant thinks about what I've shared with. I mean, Grant, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, there have been quite a number of studies that have been carried out in hospitals, and they've found where people have a view of trees through their window, they recover much faster than people who have a brick wall or a building that they can see through their window. So just the mere fact of the green trees stimulates something within the body, and it promotes healing at a much faster rate. So yeah, I just think both mentally and physically, the huge benefits of just being connected to nature. But what Lutz said just now about getting people out into wilderness, I think it's important that when those people leave the wilderness, that they have some sort of tools they take home with them to apply to the rest of their life. Otherwise, it's just another holiday. And after 2 weeks, they tend to forget about it. But I think what we're trying to do, reconnecting people in nature, when they do leave there, they leave as different people. And hopefully they will apply what they've learned in that wilderness area or in the nature area to the rest of their lives, because you're able to live a much calmer life, even in the middle of the city, if you have taken with you what you've learned in the wilderness experience that you have.
And 2 things are springing to mind as you speak, Grant. The research psychologist Kaplan did a lot of work in the late 90s and mid-90s around pictures and the impact of pictures in terms of regenerative processes, speaking to the point that Ken made, and it also explored this principle of just looking out of the window and seeing greenery, and he recorded quite a lot of valuable insight in that space. The second point I think that you've just made to me is really important with all of these processes is the sustainability of them. I think there's just so many guys out there now that claim to be eco-psychologists in some way or form, create quite a spiritual process, and then the client leaves that environment, and 2 weeks later, exactly, it was a holiday, and some of that, all of that effect is gone. I think I really enjoy the principle of annuity, that sustainability, that continued ability to draw on the skill or the process that you've learned whilst out there. I think that's a great point, Grant. Ken, you had some pictures, did you not?
Yeah, I mean, would you like me just to share? I mean, what do you? Let's. There we go. So I like I do a lot of walking in the Black Forest, and and obviously take photographs as well. But being in a context like we see here, I mean, is so powerful from an emotional, psychological well-being perspective. And just walking in a place like this, you don't actually have to do anything. You just have to be here. you know. I mean, I thought I'd just share that photograph. I mean, obviously, there's the winter treescapes. Now, I don't know, Grant, do you want to talk a little bit about winter trees, summer trees? Is there a difference? I mean, can you make any comments about winter?
Sure. I look at the process of why do trees shed their leaves? There's a reason for them shedding their leaves. You cannot have new growth when you've got the old leaves. You need to shed the old leaves for new growth to take place. And the lesson we learn from that is we can't hang on to things that are hampering our future growth and development. We need to shed those things in order new growth to take place. And that's exactly what the trees have been teaching us. You know? So that change of season, there's a reason for that. And we should use those seasons as they change to change ourselves. We need to shed our old leaves in order to allow for new leaf growth so that we can progress. But so many people hold on to those old dead leaves. And what's the point? They're serving no purpose. So the trees don't. So why should we?
Yes. That is so interesting. I mean, let me get to a photograph about what you were talking about, shedding the leaves. I mean, this photograph, I mean, talks to exactly what you were saying, Grant. You know, almost the nakedness and the bearing of one's nakedness. You know, to some extent. I mean, yeah, I think this photograph speaks to what you were saying about shedding the leaves. You know, letting go.
I read a really interesting piece this week talking to particularly letting go of ideas, concepts, relationships in the context of ego, and how the ego often holds on to ideas or principles or even businesses when they've evolved. They should have shed those leaves and moved on. And I think that analogy, Grant, just speaks beautifully to it. I think there's a lot spoken in positive psychology around these concepts of hanging on for just too long, and how that gets in the way of our own evolution and our being our best versions of self. That's a beautiful photo, Ken.
Yes, I think for me, you know, living here in Germany, where we've got these 4 distinct seasons, I think helps with the process that Grant's talking about, because you definitely get the sense of when spring is in the air and the growth and the newness. And you get the sense of that, you know, we're now in the prime of our lives, which is our summer. And then, you know, you get to the autumn and the beautiful colors, and then the leaves are dropping, and then obviously then the bareness of winter. So it's far more clearer, and there's these punctuation periods of seasons in the northern hemisphere, which I don't think we obviously have in the southern hemisphere, you know. And so you have to then be mindful of the changes that take place.
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the things I offer is I do a lot of life coaching, and I spend more time with, let's say, clients out in nature rather than in a closed room. I think nature just brings out certain things in people, and you can use nature as that very example. You know, out in the winter, all the trees are bare. You can then bring that out, and that will sort of resonate with them, and they will slowly start to shed whatever they're trying to shed and allow for new growth. Also, you know, coming back to the Kaplans again, the Kaplans also looked at different types of attention. Which was fascination attention and directed attention.
Yes.
Directed attention is what we have to do for modern day living every day, just to function properly. Whereas fascination attention is what we do when we're out in nature. There are fewer distractions, put it that way. And directed attention uses a lot of energy. Fascination attention doesn't use any energy at all. You know, so we just need to focus more on being fascinated with something rather than directing our attention to it, you know. And you know, they've written a lot on that, and it's all just pointing towards the fact that the more time we spend out in nature, the less we were distracted by the rest of our lives and things that we shouldn't get caught up in, you know. And again, it's those dead leaves. We've got to let those dead leaves go, you know.
I think they speak of art, attention restoration therapy.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
There's beauty in that word alone, art.
Art, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, spending time in nature, obviously, there are so many different benefits. And again, with the art, so many people are more creative once they've been out in nature. It brings that out in people, you know.
Stray and Ackley, in their study, came up with a 50% increase in creative problem solving after 4 days in a wilderness setting with 53 people as a sample. I think that pair have done some incredible research over the last years. What's interesting, that research also goes back to the 80s. So, you know, when we think of marketing terms or business consulting terms, we talk of early adopters and late adopters. And so, I mean, the early adopters were seeing these scientific benefits. I mean, that's 40 years ago. It's quite some time ago. I think, guys, we're coming sadly towards the end of our time. Grant, how can people get a hold of your book? And could we see it? Could you get it up onto that Zoom? Let's see if it.
I think I can show you it. Yeah.
Wow.
You can see it.
Beautiful. Forest bathing, nature therapy, and the book is known as Mindful Nature. It's written by Grant Hine, and it's spelled Hine, Grant Hine. Grant, any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave with us, and then perhaps Ken, you could finish today's session.
You know, again, I just want to reiterate that nature is the therapist, but it just needs a bit of facilitation. You can take people out into nature and you cannot do anything with them, and they don't know all the benefits. But if you start to make them aware of the benefits, it's more hugely, if I can put it that way, more hugely beneficial because they're aware of the benefits. So I think nature therapy is a combination between the guide and nature, and they work hand in hand. And I think anybody who goes out into nature will always come back and say, wow, you know, nobody comes back with a negative experience from nature. Psychologically, physically, it's a huge benefit just spending time in nature.
You know, I mean, that word wow, I think, you know, is really, I mean, that connects with me because I really agree with what Grant is actually saying there. Just by being in nature. I'd just like to add just a little bit more to this in terms of the attitude of the person who goes into nature. So we can talk about techniques and we can talk about sort of like tools and skills and so on. I think there's a deeper level to this process, is that, and it links to your point, Lutz, about when we do encounter nature, we start caring for nature. So with the attitude of when we walk into nature, with an open heart, with an open mind, with a sense of care, nature's got the power to actually transform us. And we can't walk away from it without feeling touched, in inverted commas. We get touched by the energy of trees. We get touched by the energy of waterfalls, of the sea that pounds against the rocks and so on. I think the more time you spend in nature, the more the transformation occurs. So it's like little bits and pieces of transformation, and then it becomes part of oneself. You actually start almost thriving and needing more of this because it's like almost like an oasis in the desert. You know that this is the place where you can heal, where you can regenerate, where you can rebalance, you can relax. So it's a gift. It's an absolute gift. So, I mean, it's been fascinating talking to you, Grant, and and all the best with your book. And
thank you.
Lots of bathing for you and for everybody out there. Lots of forest bathing.
Thank you very much, Grant.
If I can just say, if you want to find peace and quiet in nature, you need to discover it within your own ecological self. I'll leave you with that.
Yes.
Beautiful. Grant, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Ken, thank you so much for joining us in Germany. Ken's just been in the Alps enjoying another favorite of his nature escapes. If you've enjoyed the series, like, share. It's been a pleasure having you, and we wish you well. Ciao.
Thanks very much.